Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and it is time, once again, for Indie Game Friday, where each week I take a look at a different independent computer role-playing game. This week I'm taking a look at a survival, crafting sandbox game with RPG elements that has been kicking around on my drive for a few years now. Developed and published by a lot of games, Niffelheim was released back in 2018. Niffelheim is a 2D, side-scrolling, Norse-themed survival crafting game where you have to gather resources, face enemies, and build up your base in hostile territory. It has skills that can be improved, equipment that can be forged and built up, enemies to face, and quests to fulfill. So, basically a survival sandbox with a plotline and some RPG elements, albeit actually more RPG elements than I've seen in some that are labeled RPGs. In terms of plot, you are a warrior who has died. With your soul captured by demons on its way to Asgard, you are brought to the bleak realm of Niffelheim, where you must build up your skills and gear, and set yourself up for a final confrontation, all while facing challenges from the environment, opposing forces, and the demands of dark priests. It's pretty standard for the setup for these sorts of games in that sort of setting, but it could be worse. When you start the game, you select a single-player or multiplayer game. Niffelheim does have multiplayer support with either co-op or competitive play, after which you may select your starting area. There are 4 zones in the game. There's the Bear Mound, the Wolf Forest, and the Eagle Moor, with the Ice Dragon Wasteland rounding it out, each of which offers slightly different scenery, different residents, contents, and resources. You can add some competing bots if you're playing single player, which are AI-driven opponent Vikings that build their own bases in addition to the usual wildlife and enemies that you encounter in game. You then select a class. There is the Viking, the Valkyrie, the Berserker, and the Shaman, each of which has its own ratings in maximum health, maximum satiety, basic defense, and basic strength, as well as its own set of traits that affect how the game plays. The Viking, for instance, gets a bonus to bleed and stun resistance, slow metabolism so they eat less, and then they do decent damage, while the Shaman gets resistances to all damage types, great defense, but they eat more and they do less damage overall. Once you have entered the world, you are dropped into the side view of your starting area. The majority of the game is shown in this view. The upper left shows your character portrait, the current day and your money, as well as your health and hunger. Below this are your hotkeys. You may have a ranged and a melee weapon and a shield, and may switch between your ranged and melee loadout during the game. You may also have 4 items and quick slots to use during play. In the upper right are your basic shortcuts. You can attempt to teleport back to the main map at any time and teleport between areas. You can also access your inventory and then access the tutorial at any time. The rest of the screen, most of the time, displays a 2D side view of your character and NPCs on a background view of the area. When you are near something you can interact with, whether it be a workbench, something that can be harvested, something that can be picked up, or something that can be opened, upgraded, or otherwise used, appropriate keys will be displayed on screen. This does limit you to using items that are only in close proximity, of course. Combat also takes place on this screen and simply involves clicking and attacking with the appropriate weapon. There is an ability to take a defensive stance and block with your shield, but combat in general involves moving in and out of the way of enemy attacks and projectiles and counterattacking where necessary. It's not super complex and is kind of slow, but it does get the job done. If you reduce your target's hit points to 0, they may die and drop whatever resources you might be able to get from them. If they drop you to 0, you are returned to your spawn point, and you then have to return to your body to retrieve your things in spirit form. When you revive, you will get a mortal wound debuff. These decrease your health, hunger, and possibly damage, and they do stack, so the debuff becomes worse and worse the more you die. You can remove them by drinking regenerative potions, which can add up to a fair amount of cost, so it would behoove you to avoid dying where you can. During play, you can access the various menu screens. There's a tutorial screen that lets you get information on how to do basic tasks in the game, then a list of currently active and completed quests on the Quest tab. You get quests from various NPCs in the game over time, some of which must be discovered, some of which come knocking on your door, and some of which, like the Death Priest for instance, simply communicate their demands to you automatically. Refusing a Death Priest quest over time can end up incurring their wrath, effectively putting a time limit on accomplishing certain tasks. The Skills tab shows your progress within the basic skills of the game. There is a warrior skill, a woodcutter skill, miner, craftsman, alchemist, cook, and hunter. As you accomplish tasks and perform actions relating to each of these skill trees, you acquire more experience passively, which accrues towards levels in those skills. You get more effective when certain level thresholds are hit. These levels are called job skills, and they generally give flat bonuses to various aspects of play associated with the overall skill involved. The inventory screen shows your character's inventory and equipped gear, as well as their basic attributes. Inventory is divided into various tabs. There's weapons and tools, outfits, useful provisions, consumable items, resources for crafting, and finally quest items. You can also equip some items, a weapon and shield for melee, a ranged weapon and ammo for ranged, up to 2 tools that are used on resources when you activate them, a helm, chestplate, belt, leggings, boots, gauntlets, and shoulder item, and then finally the 4 quick slot consumables. Characters can have 4 basic stats that they are modified by their class, skills, and equipment. There's health, defense, strength, and satiety. The next tab of the general menu is the diplomacy screen, which shows the other factions that you may be competing with, what class they have selected, and what that you know about their basic in-game stats, as well as how many portal fragments were found. The general rule of thumb is that you have to accumulate 22 fragments to build a portal to Asgard, 20 of which are found on bosses, 2 are found by quest. Finally, you can adjust the in-game settings on the last tab of the menu. The overall side-scrolling overworld is used to explore the wilderness as well as to explore within structures. You start near a base which contains a number of storage chests, workbenches, places to build more storage chests, and the entrance to a mine. Outside your base, you may begin to upgrade it from a simple mound to a proper stronghold, building walls and towers to fight off the waves of enemies that might show up, and basically build additional production equipment such as farms and so forth. Within the mound, the workbenches include a sawmill used to build tools and the like, a safe to store valuable items, a forge to build weapons and armor, a throne to heal and pass time on, a kitchen to cook food and improve its nutrition, and an alchemy workshop to build potions at. You must build these workshops to get any initial benefit, and you must upgrade them to unlock higher tier recipes as time goes on. Out within the world, you can uncover other structures, ruins, tombs, and the like, that contain enemies and may give you access to the overall dungeon. The main dungeon allows you to proceed down within it, fighting enemies, uncovering resources and treasure, and facing bosses that can drop portal shards over time. You similarly have a mine within your base, which allows for easier gathering of basic materials, but also has the occasional hazard and monster within it as you delve further down. There's 2 final elements of maneuvering through the game that bear mentioning. Teleporting to the main map lets you move from region to region. There's the 4 starting regions, as I mentioned, but there's also a temple city in the middle. Moving to the central city does require money from what you've acquired, but gives the ability to access different shops. There's a merchant that allows you to buy and sell gear, from weapons to consumables and raw materials. There's the Temple of the Dragon Resurrection, which gives you the ability to summon a dragon, provided you have the equipment later. Finally, there's the general crafting station, where you can make food and such without having to visit the crafting station back at your house. And this lays the groundwork for a basic loop of the game. Like many survival games, you simply explore the world, gather materials, face off against opponents, so you can build up your base and gear, so you can go further in the world, gather more materials, and so forth. Your equipment does degrade over time, and although there are repair kits you can make, it's only very cost efficient to use them on the higher end later gear that you can craft. The addition of an external base building element brings to mind titles like Kingdom, where you have to worry about defense from an onslaught of enemies from time to time. Where Niffelheim really shines, however, is in its sheer artistry. The sprites, backgrounds, and overall look and feel of the world has a certain quality to it that is highly detailed and highly stylized. It has a highly consistent look and feel that ties the atmosphere of the game up well, and the fact that the main writer is also the artist makes it feel much like playing a single picture book by a single person, even though the team has several people on it. The music is well written and only adds to the overall look of the game, which I wouldn't necessarily call beautiful in the classical sense. It is a grim and, for lack of a better word, chunky realm, but it is incredibly aesthetic and pleasing to look at overall. The writing is a little bit less on point, but I strongly suspect that's more of an English localization thing. And the artistry of the game, the sense that the main focus of the game is artwork, kind of ties into my main issues with the game. While everything is generally pleasing to look on and listen to, the gameplay is average, maybe a little bit above average. It gets drawn back down by other parts of the game as well. As far as survival crafting games go, it gets the job done, with recipes being as obtuse as the genre demands, the resources being not too difficult but not too easy to get. But at this point, there are many games that do this as well or better. The combat is a little bit on the clunky side. I don't know if this gets much better later in the game, but for what I played of it, it just seemed a little bit tacked on, almost like combat was an afterthought, even though it's such a large part of the game. I'm not saying that it's difficult. It's not. It's just that Niffelheim looks like it wants to be more combat-oriented than its systems allow for. Attacks are slow, sometimes awkward to place, and very much boiled down to being in the right place at the right time to click and hit your opponent before hustling out of the way. There are defenses and so forth, but you're really just better off just moving away. The best idea that I have in terms of the combat is that it's not really meant to be as much of a focus as it is in the game. The questing system is basic enough, mostly consisting of gather X to turn into Y for Z, and the fact that you can accept and turn in quests from the quest screen without having to hunt down where you got it from is actually a bonus. But as you play, there is this idea that some of the quests are given with a time limit, and they're given out of the blue. And some of them actually have consequences if you don't fulfill them. By itself, this is not an issue, but there is a sort of expected track to learning how to get certain items in the game to fulfill some quests, and a lot of the crafting and other production elements aren't really well explained in the game. Now, this is all right for the genre. It's expected of the genre, since it is all about exploration and experimentation after all, but when you combine that with a time limit, even a generous one, this did result in me wanting to look at the wiki more often than not, and I can't say that it ever proved necessary. It was just the constant looming idea of it. The leveling system isn't anything outstanding. I've seen worse in ones that equally call themselves RPGs. There are also apparently some bugs in the game that one should look out for. I didn't encounter anything game-breaking in my time with it, but a small team does mean that one should look out for such things. So overall, I think Niffelheim is an above-average survival crafting game on the gameplay merits alone, but one which has so much artistry behind it that if you're one to really appreciate hand-drawn sprites and backgrounds and just chill, sometimes repetitive gameplay that lets you enjoy the experience and the spectacle of what is fundamentally playing a piece of art, then it may just be worth your while even at full price. It is available on multiple platforms, including the Switch, so I could see it being even more worthwhile as a game on the go kind of thing. On the other hand, if your main focus is on gameplay over artistry, even if you like the survival crafting genre, there's probably better places to look, at least unless you could catch it on sale or as a part of a bundle. And on that note, I am going to wrap it up here. This has been the RPG Crawler with my Indie Game Friday, Niffelheim. As always, I will put a link to where you can pick it up below. If you like what you've seen, remember to leave a like, comment if you got any feedback, and subscribe for more RPG content, both tabletop and computer. Until next time, take care and goodbye. And if you are still watching, I would like to take the opportunity to thank my supporters, the top tiers of which are listed on the screen, without whose support I would not have been able to offer the variety of content that I have on this channel throughout the years. If you're feeling particularly generous and would like to join them, you can support the channel. There are a variety of options to do so. I have a Patreon, a Subscribestar, as well as channel memberships enabled. If you are not in a position to contribute, simply leaving a like, a comment, or sharing my videos are all wonderful ways to help the channel grow without spending a dime, and are all greatly appreciated.